Hey guys, welcome to another Symbolic Studies live stream. I am Mario, in case you're new to the channel, and I have something a little different today for us all, which I'm really excited about. And it is all about the Emperor card. So, because we're in Aries season, and I actually have not done anything that has been terribly focused on the tarot, so I figured, I'm feeling it. Let's do it. Let's talk about the Emperor card. And I have something fun planned. And I have never done this before, but I'm excited. I think this is going to be cool. So, what I've done is I've gotten all of my Emperor cards from my personal collection and I've scanned them all and I've put them into a PDF. And we are going to go through each Emperor card from newest to oldest. And the older cards are really, really interesting. I mean, there's interesting cards from all eras of tarot, in my opinion, but the older cards, there's just so much juice with some of these older decks. So I have a few decks from the 15th century, and I've got a lot of decks in between. And so the people who stick around are going to be rewarded, in my opinion, because these older decks are just so fantastic for so many different reasons. Also, I just want to mention that I'm giving away a tarot reading, a half-hour tarot reading. And all you have to do is leave a comment in this video. So just leave a comment, not in the chat, but leave a comment. And by the end of the weekend, I'm just going to choose someone at random and I'm going to give away a tarot reading. So if you're interested in a reading, leave a comment and you might be the winner. And I'll use some random generator to pick the winner. So it's just all going to be completely random. So best of luck if you leave a comment. And you can leave any comment at all. So it's all good, whatever you decide to put in there. And I think that's pretty much it. So I'm going to hide myself here so that we can get a nice big view of the artwork within these cards. And so there I am. Wow, there's just a lot to get to. So without further ado, let's get to it. And by the way, I hope you guys are all doing well. And thank you so much if you're hanging out live. And if you're catching this after the fact, much appreciated. So, for the artwork for the thumbnail, I used the Rider-Waite version, right? And I really wanted to emphasize, which we'll be getting into, but I really wanted to emphasize the fact that the Emperor here is symbolic of the central mountain, the world mountain, Mount Meru, if you will, the mountain that exists symbolically, at the very least, at the center of this plane or at the center of Earth, arguably at the north. And so here you can see what I did for the artwork was I took away the canvas frame of the card itself, and then I extended those mountains. And you can see pretty clearly, in my opinion, that that is what's being conveyed here, is that the Emperor is operating as a very stable central mountain. And so I think that's pretty obvious once it's pointed out to you. And I've done a post or two about this dynamic as well. But right off the bat, that's something I just wanted to mention. And, this artwork is so classic for so many different reasons. But the color palette, as an example, is significant. I think of Mars, the planet of war, the red planet. And so you're going to see a lot of cards that are very red or warm, very orangey. You're going to see a lot of older emperors with beards, things like that. So, I love so many different decks, but I do have a special place in my heart for the Rider-Waite, which is a classic for sure. But let's get to the first deck. So, by the way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this PDF available for people. So if you're interested in this PDF, you can message me. But what I think I'm going to do is after the show, I'm going to upload it somewhere and I'm going to put a link in the description. So if you're catching this after the fact, that link should be there should you want to download this PDF and study these cards more on your own. So this is the first deck. This is the Golden Art Nouveau deck. It's from 2019. And also, what I'll do too is I'll publish the list of cards in the description as well. So I have them all written out right here. And so if there's some artwork that you really like, you'll be able to find what deck that is pretty easily. And then I'm also including the year in which they were first published or created, rather. But this is actually the deck that I use for tarot readings. And so this is an updated version, in my opinion, of the Rider-Waite deck. And the reason why I use it is because the artwork is classic. Like I love the way they illustrated everything. And so I think that they did the Rider-Waite justice with how high quality the artwork is. But then also they kept a lot of the classic themes intact as well. A lot of classic symbolism has remained intact within this deck, the Golden Art Nouveau. So that is why I use it for readings. I usually use this deck or the Thoth deck if people request that. But here you have the Emperor, and he's sitting on his stone throne. So that's something to keep in mind, is that these thrones are often made out of stone. And as I was just saying, the Emperor oftentimes is compared symbolically, thematically, with a central mountain, because in the most positive aspects, the Emperor brings stability. So he brings stability to the family unit, to his community or his kingdom, when he's being righteous, right? And so all of the cards have a light aspect and also a dark aspect to them. So in his best aspect, he brings stability. He brings order, which is related to stability. And these ideas are very closely related to the number 4. And so think of, say, like a basic foundation for a home or a building. It's going to be square, or rectangular. And so there's going to be 4 corners, right? 4 90-degree angles somewhere. And the number 4 has a lot to do with foundations, and has a lot to do with Earth. And so Earth is often compared to the number 4 for various reasons. Just think of the 4 corners of Earth as an example, the 4 cardinal directions, right? And so the number 4 relates to Earth in a number of ways. And so I think that's interesting because of this stone throne dynamic, right? And here you have the Emperor. In one hand, he's holding a sphere. In the other hand, he's holding a scepter. This scepter is going to be something that we'll be obviously talking about throughout this presentation. There are a number of scepters that he can be seen holding, but oftentimes it kind of has a very basic structure. Usually there is some sort of cross element and then a circle up top. So it almost looks like a T with a circle up top. So in some ways, this kind of almost looks like an elongated Venus symbol, right? Venus often has a circle up top and then a cross down below. That is the common symbol for Venus. And so it generally looks something along these lines, but like I said, there are variations. It kind of, in that way, almost kind of looks like an ankh as well, right? But what I pick up from this is there is a masculine and a feminine kind of coming together with the scepter. And so the feminine would be the circle up top, and then the masculine would be like that Tau cross down below. Scepter symbolism is fascinating and very interesting, and we'll just unpack this as we move through this series here and see all of the cards. The other thing you'll notice too is that his legs are exposed. And so this is kind of a common theme with the Emperor, is that his legs will sometimes be revealed, that he'll be wearing a robe, but the legs themselves are exposed. And so to me, this implies a few different things, and we'll see how it's evolved over time as well, because once again, this is the most recent version, the most recent deck that I have in my collection from 2019. You'll see that in older versions of the card, it's not uncommon to see him with crossed legs. And I think that his legs showing, it's a very interesting small detail. But there's other cards like, say, the Justice card, right? Justice or balance or adjustment. They will show literally, Lady Justice will have like 1 foot exposed, but with the Emperor, there is more of an emphasis on both legs being shown. And so this will be another theme that we kind of unpack as we go through this series, because there's so many examples of all of the things that I just mentioned that, I don't know. I don't feel like we have to completely unpack it all right now. The Emperor, obviously, he generally is wearing some sort of crown. And this makes a lot of sense too, because Aries, relates to the head. And so Aries is the first sign, under a lot of systems. It's the first sign of the astrological year. And so it leads the way. And the ram is obviously well known for having these big, powerful horns, right? So everything about ram symbolism suggests being very headstrong. And obviously, how do rams fight? They butt heads. And so this crown being emphasized, a lot of crown symbolism definitely relates to solar symbolism. And in some cards, you'll actually see this like being a very obvious thing that's nodded to as well. And I just think that emphasizing the head because of the headstrong nature of the ram makes a lot of sense. Aries is the head of the zodiac, right? And we come into this world head first as well, right? It's crowning. And so there's a lot of head symbolism that I'll be paying attention to throughout this series as well. And so here it is. This is the first card. Lots of classic imagery for the Emperor. As I was saying, red relating to the red planet. I think of blood and bloodshed. I think of war. Mars is the planet of war. There's a lot to be said regarding Aries and the nature of sacrifice as well. There's a sacrificial quality to this time of year. A lot of wars have occurred during this time of year. Assassinations have occurred during this time of year, like Caesar. Caesar was killed during Aries season, and he is an emperor, right? And so this is my understanding is this is where we get Beware the Ides of March from. And even March itself, right? March, M-A-R, that comes from Mars, right? Even my name, Mario, comes from Mars. And I even think, too, with March, I think of literally what soldiers do who are going to war, right? They're marching in the streets, or they're marching to their next destination. And so there's just, as you can see, this symbolism is just so multifaceted, multi-layered. There's lots of different tangents we could go in. Also, regarding the sacrificial nature of everything, by the way, Jesus, right? So Jesus was crucified during Aries season, and he was known as the Lamb of God, right? And so that's something that you'll see being alluded to in several cards. But yeah, let's move on to the second card that I have in my collection. And so this is the Ethereal Visions deck from 2018. And so notice that the Emperor here is not throned. Generally, he is. And actually, him sitting down is very interesting. There's a few cards where we'll kind of get into this idea of what it means, the fact that the Emperor is actually seated, right? What does it mean that he's actually stationary versus, say, standing up? But here you see another emperor with a really nice, big, long white beard. I love this deck as well. And actually, what you see in this imagery here, what appears to be very dark or even black is actually foil. It's actually silver foil. So when I scanned it, it did not pick up that quality. But when you look at it in person, those animals, those rams, they really shine because it's silver foil. And so anyway, but here this emperor looks very proud. He's very upright. yet he's holding, right, very similar symbols that we'll see throughout like the whole entire series. So he's holding a globe or a sphere in one hand, in his left hand, and then in his right hand, I think it's kind of interpretive, actually. To me, it kind of looks like he's either holding an actual literal ankh, or he's holding perhaps the top of a sword, right? And so either way, it's very similar to the scepter that the previous emperor was holding. Okay. And the fact that he's holding the feminine part of the Ankh, or if it's the symbolically the symbol for Venus, I think it's kind of curious that in both hands he's holding a feminine symbol, essentially a sphere, which sphere and globe symbolism often relates to the heavens. It's generally looked at as being more feminine. And so I think that's kind of a curious detail, which is something that we'll be talking about, is that it's kind of surprising once you start noticing it, but there's a lot of feminine symbolism within the Emperor card. So even though he's supposed to be the patriarchal figure representing authority, representing order, you'll see that there's a lot of feminine symbolism that he's actually attached to. And this is a common thing within the tarot as well. You'll see that what astrological sign or the energetic association with a card might appear to be feminine or masculine, but when you really start decoding the symbols contained within the card, you'll notice that it actually contains a lot of opposing or polarity symbols as well. And some of the older Emperor cards, guys, the Emperor is very, very feminine, like extremely, way more than what we've seen so far. So if if you watch the rest of the stream, you'll definitely see that. It's very, very interesting once it's pointed out to you. But otherwise, I think some fairly standard symbolism. And this card is, or this whole entire deck, I love the illustration style, but it's fairly stripped down symbolically. So let's move on to the other card. So this is the Pagan Otherworlds deck. So this is from 2016. And by the way, if you guys have any suggestions, or rather, if you guys have any comments with these cards, and if you guys are picking up certain details, I would love to know what you guys think. And so I learn a lot from your guys' comments and input and everything else. So definitely leave a comment, or if you're in the chat, feel free and let us know what you're thinking. Obviously, I will not be checking the chat, by the way, throughout the presentation, but I will be hanging out for a bit at the very tail end. And so, anyways, just thought I would throw that out there. Would love to know what you guys are thinking, because there's a variety of cards here, and I know that there's going to be things that I'm either just not highlighting or that I've missed entirely, or you guys just might have like a really good insight that I had not considered. So please let me know what you think. But yeah, so this deck, the Pagan Otherworlds from 2016, it has a very sort of natural look to everything. And so here you see what looks like a very primitive emperor, right? And so he's also holding, though, some of the classic symbols associated with the emperor. It's not uncommon to see the emperor holding a staff or a wand and then this sphere. And just when I see this dynamic, I just think of power, right? And I think of power from a masculine perspective, a phallic perspective, which is what he's holding, right? That stick. And then also from the feminine perspective, because he's holding that sphere or holding that globe. And so to me, there's very much a unification sort of opposites going on here. And I wish I would have looked into it before I started the presentation, but the animal on his head, is that a goat or is that a ram? To me, it looks very goat-like, which would be really interesting because there are a lot of symbolic themes associated with both the goat and the ram. They've both been considered sacrificial animals. They both are excellent climbers, and so they both climb these mountains. And rams are only found at really high elevation too, which is what makes it difficult to hunt. Ram hunting is a very costly effort because you really have to go out of your way to find these guys. And then obviously, once you're at such a high elevation, you're at war with the elements and things like that. And so they're excellent climbers. But in many ways, I think that the ram and the goat are kind of, they're on this spectrum, but yet they're completely related to each other. And so the goat is associated with Earth and, oftentimes with Saturn, Capricorn, right? The sea goat. And then the ram, clearly Aries and Christ, once again being the Lamb of God, things like that. And so it's almost kind of like a good cop, bad cop sort of thing, right? Where the Aries definitely, I would say there's generally more positive associations connected to the ram and lamb. There's more of an innocence there versus the goat is like the complete opposite, right? But here, instead of wearing a crown, he's wearing what looks to be like some sort of fur headwear, almost kind of like a headdress sort of thing. And he's just completely layered, in these other cloths or furs. But otherwise, this is just a very simple, primitive sort of take on the symbolism that we've seen so far. But this deck is gorgeous too, by the way. There's some excellent cards in here. And he is also throned. He's not standing, right? And so for our next card, this is the Tarot of the Holy Light. And this is from 2015. This is an interesting deck for a few reasons. My understanding is the creator of this deck essentially finds really interesting older alchemical works of art, and then she takes those images and combines them and creates these tarot cards, which I think is a really cool idea for a few different reasons, And so this is just one example. And she also has a very interesting interpretation of the planetary or astrological influences behind each card. So here you can see at the bottom right that she just corresponds the Emperor with Jupiter. And so she doesn't put Aries there. She puts Jupiter. And so Jupiter is obviously clearly associated with the Emperor as well, though. And so when you're talking Jupiter, I think of that paternal figure, that patriarchal figure. Jupiter is oftentimes related to expansion. And so I almost think of like the emperor expanding his kingdom, right? And having a great sphere of influence, around him, being a very powerful person, having, people underneath him, having resources to be able to accomplish projects and whatnot. A lot of people relate Jupiter. Obviously, it's not even a lot of people, but Jupiter is often corresponded, right, with Zeus. And so when you're talking about Jupiter, I think of Zeus, and then arguably you can say, Zeus is very much related to Jesus. And so also very, very curious too, and makes so much sense. But the emperor, or excuse me, the Jupiter symbol is a 4. I mean, just look at that glyph. It is the number 4 as well. So clearly, king symbolism relates to Jupiter. He's often known as being, the main supreme kind of patriarchal deity, right? And so, and even too, Jupiter, the planet, right? I mean, just look at the colors of Jupiter and look how monstrously huge Jupiter is. And then Jupiter, pater, father, things like that. And so Jupiter obviously has a major correspondence with the Emperor card. And so I think that her just, having that correlation makes a lot of sense. One little detail, though, that I noticed that I thought was very, very interesting is that he is holding. Now, we'll see a bunch of different versions of this throughout this presentation, but in his right hand, you'll see that the emperor is holding what's known as a globus cruciger. And so it's a sphere with a cross on top of it. And when you look into it, there are like multiple interpretations of what this means symbolically. What is represented with this design, right? It's also known as a holy hand grenade. And I tend to, when I look at symbolism, I really like to get down to the nuts and bolts of what a symbol means. And so when I look at this symbol, what I see with the Globus Cruciger in his right hand, what I see is an upside down Venus glyph. So, as I was saying earlier, the Venus symbol is a circle up top with a cross down below. And here, what you see is the cross up top and then the circle or sphere down below. And so I've explained this before, but when you are with the Venus glyph, as an example, with the circle up top and the cross below, what you're saying is that the feminine takes priority or takes precedence over the masculine. And so when you flip it, what you're saying is that the masculine takes precedent over the feminine. And so this upside down Venus glyph is actually under certain systems and it's little known. So I rarely hear people talk about it. And to be honest, I can't even remember where I read it. I know it's in one of my resource books here, but it was saying that it under one school of thought that these magicians or occultists, they actually used the upside down Venus glyph as the glyph for Mars. So the classic glyph for Mars, right, is that circle with an arrow going to the upper right. I really love using the upside down Venus glyph for Mars. And so I'm sure pretty much everyone here who would be watching this is well aware, but that old classic mantra or saying, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? And so under my own personal system, when I'm taking notes, generally when I'm making a reference to Mars, I use an upside down Venus glyph. So that's the cross up top and a circle down below. And this makes perfect sense for the emperor because generally he corresponds with Mars, right? And if you notice, so look at the right-hand side of the slide, and you have this sphere down below, right? And you see the solar symbolism on the left-hand side, and then you see the lunar symbolism on the right-hand side. And then just above it, in between these two halves, seemingly between day and night, you have this phoenix, right? Clearly you see the fire and then this bird. When you look at this bird, this phoenix, and you look at that circle, it is also making the silhouette of a Globus Cruciger, which means that it's also making the glyph of Mars in some esoteric circles. And so that's what I see. I see that that phoenix is a direct nod, and that the globe or the circle that it sits on is a direct nod to what this emperor is holding in his right hand. And so when you look into the Globus Cruciger, you're going to see things that it relates to, alchemy and or just power in general. I've heard power over the secular world. The church's power over the globe is something that I've seen kind of referenced a couple of different times. I think there's room for interpretation, but like I said, when you break it down to its nuts and bolts, I think it's a masculine over feminine sort of symbol, which makes sense for the emperor. Also notice that his hair is turning into what appears to be clouds. And so I think that that's really interesting for a few different reasons, but including the fact that men tend to be more analytical and left brain than women, versus women tend to be more holistic and more emotional, right? And so obviously these are just classic examples here. And so men can be very emotional, women can be very analytical. But the fact that his head is seemingly, morphing into the clouds, morphing into the heavens, morphing into the sky above our heads, I think is very, very interesting. And I have to mention the fact, too, that one of my buddies, LC King, who I've done a couple of streams with on this channel, live streams with, he's always referencing the idea that mind is related to wind, right? And so mind, the M, all you have to do is flip it and you get wind. And so there is a very powerful correspondence between air symbolism, wind symbolism, mind symbolism, etc. But actually, I would love to know the artist who created this. What was her intention behind his hair turning into the clouds? I think that's very, very intriguing for a few different reasons. But as I said earlier, there's a lot of symbolism related to Aries that has to do with the head. And then also too, regarding this globe, this solar and lunar globe, I think there's a lot that you can say about this, but how I personally interpret it is essentially that whenever two energies come together, say solar energy and lunar energy, the masculine and the feminine, a third energetic quality is created. And that's kind of what you see with this phoenix here, that these two powers combined creates a third thing. And so there is a third thing being birthed or rebirthed, if you will. And I see it being expressed with that phoenix. But as always, with a lot of these things, there's definitely room for interpretation. And then we also see here too that this emperor is not throned, but he is standing. But moving on. So that was Tarot of the Holy Light from 2015. And here we have the Night Sun Tarot, which is from 2014. I believe this is the first clear eagle that we have as well. And so, yeah, so here what they decided to do, and this deck is wild, by the way. I'm not the biggest fan of all of the cards in the deck, if I'm being completely honest. I think some of the artwork and some of the imagery, some of the figures look kind of stiff because you can tell it's computer generated. But symbolically, there's some cards in this deck that are really, really excellent. And so once again, the Night Sun Tarot from 2014. The eagle clearly corresponds, right, with Zeus. And if I'm not mistaken, as well as the ram, he at one point transformed into the ram. So he's transformed into several animals. And I might even just be spacing on things, but I wouldn't be surprised if he turned into the eagle as well. Maybe someone can clarify that in the comments. But here what you see is, a rendition or a depiction of Christ, of Jesus, kind of alluding to or speaking to the things that I was mentioning earlier. He has these two big ram heads or skulls on his shoulders there. And then you can see the crown of thorns right on his head, kind of like a classic depiction of Christ. And then he has an interesting scepter here, the cross, what appears to be this cross scepter or staff penetrating that globe or sphere. And so once again, very similar, but just a slightly different take than some of the other scepters that we've seen so far. He's wearing red, which makes a lot of sense. Once again, Mars being the planet of war. And as I was saying earlier, Jesus was literally crucified during this time of year, during Aries season. I also think it's intriguing, too, that just behind him, there's a staircase leading upward. This implies ascension, right, and moving upward. It kind of reminds me of the idea of this central mountain sort of concept, or the fact that rams are excellent climbers and can climb to great heights, right? And so, so this is the first time we're seeing the eagle, but it definitely won't be the last. Also notice that in the upper right, there is a Hebrew letter, and this is Tzadi. And this means, it means fish hook. And so to me, that's very, very interesting because we just got out of Pisces season. So when I look at the tarot and I'm looking at any card from the major arcana, and if I'm looking at a card that specifically relates to an astrological sign, what I think you're seeing is you're seeing an expression of that constellation. And so the Emperor card, it is basically a visual representation of Aries. That's how I interpret these cards. And so when you're looking, say, at the Star card, that is a visual representation of Aquarius. And obviously, all of the signs are acknowledged within the major arcana. And so to me, they are one and the same. So this is why the tarot is like such an excellent tool to learn astrology, because once you know the correspondence, you will start learning a lot more about the sign. So once you know that this is related to Aries, there's just certain things you can pick up about the quality of Aries that maybe you wouldn't have picked up anywhere else. But when it's visually represented, when it's artistic, and there's symbolism there for you to see, some new details and insights start coming to light. But there's an interesting flip that occurred with Aleister Crowley, and it's a Hebrew letter flip that some of you guys may or may not be familiar with. But there's a reason why I brought up the star card as the other example, because the flip happened with Hebrew letters between the Emperor card and the star card. So my understanding is that prior to Crowley, the main correspondence, and there's still many decks that use this correspondence. The main correspondence for the Emperor is Hey, so like Yod Hey Vav Hey, or excuse me, I see it whenever I talk about the flip, I always get it completely turned around. So the classic interpretation is Tazidi, and Crowley flipped it to Hey. Or is it the other way around? I'm completely spacing and getting things confused, which I'm not surprised, which is hilarious to me because this has literally been going on for years. And so I've gotten this letter flip confused in my mind for a very long time now. But tzatziki means fishhook, and hey means window or to reveal, essentially. And so I think that that's kind of an interesting detail to note. I'm not even so stuck, honestly, on the correspondence with the letters. I think that there's additional insights and details about it that you can learn. But I think that if you have your own sort of system and you see things a certain kind of way, I say go for it and do what makes sense for you, obviously. And so, I was reading about this earlier today too, like multiple places as well, just refreshing my memory about everything. But the flip is between tzatziki, the fishhook, and hey, which means window or to reveal. So depending on your deck, you might see either or, basically. And this gets into like, there's like a Kabbalistic tree of life reason behind this switch. And so as we move on here, I'll acknowledge which letter it is and all of that. So this is once again the Night Sun Tarot from 2014. And moving on all the way to the year 2000 is the Tarot of the Third Millennium, right? And so I recently picked up this deck late last year, and I think it's fantastic. It's actually the version that I have is just a major arcana deck, so there aren't any minor cards to speak of. Not in this illustration quality. My understanding is that there was an earlier version of this deck that had other cards, the minor cards, but it did not match the illustration quality. It's like a different style altogether. But Tarot of the Third Millennium. And so here you see the Globus Cruciger in his right hand, and you can see the introduction of one theme that we will be talking about throughout the presentation is this idea of the Emperor being related to the cubic stone and being related to cubes. And so his throne here is very, very simple, and it's a cubic stone. And so there are several cubic stones in the tarot. It's not uncommon, as an example, to see the charioteer within a cubic stone as well, and that the chariot itself, the body of the chariot, is a cubic stone. And so to me, when I think of the cube, I think of stability. I think of it being a building block, right? And so I think of kind of what I was talking about earlier regarding foundations and things like that. You'll notice too that even Baphomet is sitting on a cubic sort of stone or cubic throne that's on a sphere or the globe. And so for someone in power, it's not uncommon to see this sort of thing propping up. And so we will see multiple examples of this, right? Here he has a very large staff, and then it almost just looks like a trident sort of at the end of the staff. Trident symbolism is fascinating. There's a lot to say about that. But the main thing I tend to think about is the fact that the middle of the trident is just an extension of the staff. And so to me, this relates to this central pillar, middle pillar sort of concept, which I've talked about in other channels, or excuse me, other live streams. And so if you want to learn more about that, you can check out some of that material. But there is definitely a middle pillar or middle way central mountain sort of theme going on with the Emperor. Absolutely. And so otherwise, this is a unique card because too, we're seeing a sideways view of the Emperor, where normally he's facing, the audience, right? This time we only see half of him, which I think is intriguing. And this whole deck too, by the way, like there are very, very striking silhouettes. There's really striking compositions, which is one of the reasons why I picked it up. And to me, this design really is no different. I love kind of how bare the background is too, just so that the artwork of the Emperor can pop there. So here's the example of the other Hebrew letter of Hey, right, in the left-hand side of the card. And so Hey, once again, meaning window into reveal. So you will see this sort of switch depending on if you're looking at a deck that follows the Thoth tradition or not the Thoth tradition. Just the kind of some of the more classic interpretations of that correspondence. So there's that on the left-hand side. And then on the right, you see a symbol for sulfur. And so sulfur is very much related to the Emperor as well. Sulfur is one of the three philosophical or alchemical elements. So sulfur, salt, and mercury. Sulfur is so important, and it is in so many things. And so it makes sense that it would be one of the philosophical elements. And actually, I have some sulfur right here. And just in spirit of this presentation, I'm going to grab it and put it on my desk. So 1 second. All right, I have it right here. Yeah, here it is. So I just took a whiff of the sulfur. I'm looking at it right now, and it's yellow, right? And so it's yellow. It's a very active, fiery, warm, substance, material, element. And so sulfur, there's so much that can be said about sulfur and its relationship to life and everything that it's found within. It just goes on and on and on. But whenever I think of sulfur, I can't not mention the three philosophical elements or main alchemical principles. Right, so moving on, this is the Alejandro Jodorowski deck. So this came out in 1998, and this is essentially a revised version of a classic deck, which is the Marseille. And so I have an older version of the Marseille way later on in the presentation. But what Jodorowski did was he took the basic artwork and he cleaned it up quite a bit. He retraced everything and he put his own sort of spin on a lot of things within the cards. So there's a lot of little details that perhaps some of them were there originally and some of them weren't. As an example, I'm just looking right now. Look at his helmet. So to me, his helmet looks like there's an embedded compass right there, right? Do you guys see that? So there's an orange compass, and the point of pivot with the compass would be that ball on the top of the helmet there. And so this makes a lot of sense because domes, right? Domes are very much related to compass symbolism. In the Freemasonic tradition, the compass is very much related to the heavens. And there's this old idea, right, that we live within a firmament, which is a dome-like structure. And so he's alluding to the compass here. We'll see. I'm just going to make a note of it. is there anything even closely uh, related to the compass on the emperor's head when we go to the older version? The version I have, which we'll see later, is from 1709, by the way. So that's an interesting detail. So that's kind of like what he's done. So you see those little circles within his hair. There's lots of little things that he put in here. And if you want like a really good breakdown of these cards, from his perspective, he has a book that essentially corresponds with the deck. And there's a lot of little things there that you'll pick up that are kind of interesting. And I know some people aren't big fans of this deck. I've talked to people about it, and so it's kind of a hit or miss depending on who you are. But he has a lot of interesting insights regarding the deck, regardless. But you can see lots of classic symbolism here, but there's two main things, perhaps three things here that are being introduced for the first time here because he used an older deck to work off of. One of the things is that his legs are crossed. And so this is a common sort of thing that you'll see, is that the emperor oftentimes has his legs crossed. And sometimes it's very, very obvious and very noticeable. And so think about it, right? Cross, you're crossing your legs. I think of the cross, like the actual literal cross, the one that he has like on the top of his scepter there, which is basically like a globus cruciger upside down Venus glyph slash Mars glyph on top of that rod, right? And so the cross reminds me of the number 4, right? Just like the glyph for Jupiter, the number 4. And also to another theme that I'm still chewing on, to be completely honest. The other theme that I think is very interesting with older cards is the fact that the emperor is oftentimes gesturing his waistband or his belt. And so here you can see he is holding it, right, with his left hand. So his right hand arguably has a more phallic connotation associated with it because of that scepter. But then his left hand is associated with his belt. And so his belt or waistband, that's more feminine in my opinion. And so a belt is going to create a loop around your body. So it's going to create a circle around your body. So I wonder if that's kind of what's being alluded here. I think also too, it implies there being a gut instinct, right? He's acknowledging his midsection. And I think that it could be implying, his hunches regarding perhaps what to do in his kingdom, how he feels about certain things, that he's actually going to use his gut instinct. He's going to use some of these insights, right? These understandings about how to live life and how to do things and whatnot. So he's not entirely, as I'm kind of alluding to as well, the emperor isn't entirely masculine. There is a lot of feminine, very subtle feminine symbolism going on within the emperor card, which again, we will see once we move forward with some of the older decks. It becomes very, very obvious and noticeable. And that is just how symbolism works. I've been saying this for a little while now, but when you look into masculine symbolism, you're going to see the feminine. When you look into feminine symbolism, you're going to find the masculine. It just seems to be how it all breaks down and how it all operates. And there's a number of tarot cards that really speak to this as well, I would say. The third thing that is being introduced here, because once again, this is essentially a revised older deck, is that shield that you see there right in front of his chair. And so it's not uncommon to see an eagle on the shield or a double-headed eagle on the shield. And so when I think of shield symbolism, I think of war, I think of protection, things like that. I think of armor and whatnot, concepts that to me are very much related to Mars and, Mars being the warring planet. And so there it is. So this is the Jodorowski card. I like it. I think it's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of other smaller details now that I'm debating whether or not to unpack. As an example, like, right behind his left shoulder on the right-hand side, to me, it looks like there's a pretty obvious circumpunct there, right? The circle with the dot in it. And this reminds me that the sun is actually exalted in Aries, which I think is interesting. And so it could be a direct nod towards that. Around his necklace there, you see a quartered circle, the cross within a circle. To me, this just reminds me of like the sacred center. I think that when you see the quartered circle, the cross within the circle, it's actually a geocentric symbol. So it's a symbol relating to the earth and relating to the north. So where the cross, literally the vertical and horizontal line, where they cross right in the middle, that would be the north. And so there are northern symbols that we will be getting into as well. So I'm just I'm just spitballing here, but this is a great card for a lot of different reasons. But moving on from 1998's Jodorowski to the Tarot of Ceremonial Magic. And so this comes from 1995. This is a deck created by Lon Milo Duquette. Some of you guys might be familiar with him, but he's a big deal in the OTO. So I think he might even literally be like, the oldest member and the highest degreed member in the OTO. And so he has, a lot of things to say in regards to, which the OTO is the Ordo Templi Orientis. He has a lot of things related to Crowley in his decks and related to that magical system and whatnot. But this is an interesting interpretation of the card for a few different reasons. And first and foremost, notice the glyphs down below. And so this actually kind of clears things up. So that is in the middle. You can see the Tizadi, the fish hook Hebrew letter. So this is what Crowley corresponds with the card. And in non-Crowleyan, non-Thoth deck influenced decks, you're going to see Hey being associated with the card. And so this kind of this clarifies it for sure. Notice that there's 4 pillars behind him, no doubt relating to this classic 4 numerological association, with the Emperor being the 4th card in the major arcana. He's holding a globus cruciger in front of him. In his left hand, he's holding a staff with a ram head on top. And it appears as though this is Caesar. And I could be wrong on that one. This deck is interesting for a few reasons. I've said that a lot of times this evening for a few reasons, but it's true. He uses real life like photos, and he uses actual real people in his deck. So he is even in his own deck, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's the Hanged Man, if I'm not mistaken. And so he has Crowley in his deck. There's other people in his deck where I'm like, that looks like a real person. And this one looks no different. And it makes sense too, because the artistic style of this whole entire deck, I'll just say, is very crude. And so here you can literally see like the line work, like the which isn't so bad, but you can tell it's actually literally like a pen. And some of the illustrations are very, very low quality. And it's actually really funny because I bought this deck at a tarot conference and I had never seen it before in real life. And I went up to this table. They had a bunch of decks. I saw that they had this deck in particular. I bought it, and the lady said something along the lines of like, "Oh, that deck's angry." And so she said that she's worked with it before, but this deck is angry. And I'm like, that's hilarious. Knowing who created it and kind of what the artwork looks like and how it's like a Thoth influenced deck and everything else, it totally just made me laugh. So whenever I see it and I'm like criticizing the artwork a little bit, I'm like, that's just so funny that it's an angry deck. It's a mean deck. And so I said, oh, well, that's fine. I'm not really going to work with it. I just want the artwork, basically. But notice this is such a huge detail that is obviously, it's like you can't really miss it, but he is part of this cubic stone. And so he is literally fused. He is part of this stone. So he is a statue, right? And so it's almost like an unfinished sort of statue. And so now when I think about it that way, there's a lot of symbolism in Freemasonry regarding statues, and how you can have this like rough, rock hunk of marble, and then it, with time and dedication and the right skills and the right know-how and everything else, you just start chipping away at this marble. And there's already the belief is that one of the ideas behind creating these statues, and not like in a composite sort of way, but when you're actually literally taking one hunk of marble and chipping away at it, is that the statue is already complete within. It's just whether or not, you're going to unveil that, whether or not you're going to actually reveal that. And so I think that's really interesting. So there's a transmutation, alchemical sort of thing with creating statues that way. This belief that the statue already exists within. It's just about you showing it, right? Showing it off and showing it to people. And so that's fascinating. And once again, the cubic stone being this theme relating to the earth and foundations and things of that sort, right? And also, too, there's these interesting symbols down below. And I wish I would have decoded these or found out what they're all about, but perhaps someone out there already knows what's going on. There is a clear swastika in the left panel there, which I think is interesting because I often associate the swastika as a northern symbol. So to me, the way the swastika came to be is that people acknowledged the rotation of the heavens, but in particular, the rotation of the circumpolar constellations around the North Star, specifically Ursa Major around the North Star. And Ursa Major, it kind of looks like a 7, right? And so it looks like one of those arms of the swastika. And so the middle part of the swastika, where those lines intersect, that would be the northern sky where Polaris, the pole star, is. And so what you're seeing is basically a representation of Ursa Major going around the pole star throughout the year, 4 times a year, right? Once per season. And so, as I was saying earlier, there are northern symbolic things going on with this card and with like the whole major arcana, by the way. And so I think that's kind of a curious thing. Even the pillars themselves, how it kind of mirrors that staff, and how I often associate any pillar, whether it's a twin pillar or there's 4 pillars or whatever, acknowledging one pillar is acknowledging the central pillar, which is basically the world axis, the point in which the heavens revolve around. And so anyway, so there is all of that. But that is the Tarot of Ceremonial Magic from 1995. And here we have Tarot of the Ages from 1988. And so this is clearly an Egyptian-themed tarot deck, right? And there's some really cool things going on here. Here, the Emperor is holding a flail and a crook. And this very much relates to shepherd symbolism, right? And so the idea was that the crook would be the, the gentle way of leading your flock. And then the flail would be the harsh way of leading your flock, because the flail is a weapon and the crook is basically meant to lead. So it's really interesting. There's this concept of mercy and severity. And so the crook would be related to mercy, and then the flail would be related to severity, right? And this whole idea relates to the ram and the lamb, and Christ being the Lamb of God, Christ being the Good Shepherd, Christ leading his flock, right? And so the ram in and of itself, his flock is the rest of the zodiac. Aries is the head of the zodiac. So in a way, Aries itself, the ram itself, is the Good Shepherd leading his flock, right? And this idea of leading your flock as well to greener pastures, the big sort of encode with that, in my opinion, basically has to do with the idea of being a psychopomp or being the guide of souls. And so Christ is leading his flock to the afterlife, right? And so if you see a painting of a good shepherd, you are seeing a psychopomp, which is very mercurial, by the way, a psychopomp figure leading his flock to the other side, to the great beyond, through this incredible transition that is death, essentially. Um, there's a lot of Egyptian symbolism that we can get into here, but you'll also see the cubic stone right underneath the emperor there, right? Just continuing that theme. You see a serpent on the left hand side, and then you see a vulture on the right hand side. The vulture is interesting too because it is my understanding that the vulture actually traditionally is considered to be a very feminine bird. And so, like, I believe Ma'at, right? Her feather of truth is a vulture feather. And so during the weighing of the souls ritual in ancient Egypt, it is a vulture feather that is the feather of truth that's being weighed against the hearts of man. So just thought I would point that out. And then he also has this sphere resting in his lap. And so it's right there over his crotch, right? And so to me, I almost feel as though they're implying the masculine with its placement and then also the feminine with just what it is. But when you're just dealing with the sphere as well, because it kind of looks like an egg here, you're dealing with like egg symbolism and seed symbolism. You're dealing with like the generative principle, the thing that kind of creates and the thing that everything returns to, the sacred center, if you will. And so I think that's kind of a curious placement, the fact that it's just resting there. So yeah, so that's what I got for that. So Tarot of the Ages, right, 1988. And then also the Ram. Sorry, I just have to mention this. The Ram, right? Pyramid, right? Literally within pyramid itself, you have the word Ram. And then within Ram, you have Ra. And so there's that whole connection as well. And then even just kind of just going to throw it out there, but even Aries itself, right, starts with an A. A capital A is a pyramid. It's a pyramid with the capstone. And so, and even to the whatever is behind him with those two ram skulls or heads, it kind of, there's like an apex, right, just behind his crown. And it almost looks like there's sort of like a similar sort of thing going on down below. I don't know if it's supposed to be just a perspective thing or if they're alluding to like an upward triangle or perhaps even an upward pyramid. And this to me, I think is fascinating too, because I was talking about the central mountain. When you look at pyramid symbolism just in and of itself, to me now, it's so obvious that pyramids must have been inspired by actual real mountains. So it's like a synthetic mountain when you're looking at a pyramid. And I think now when I look at pyramids from all over the world, it just makes me wonder, are these all references to the central mountain, Mount Meru? I don't know. I think it's very interesting. The other thing I think is interesting, because I've been down this rabbit hole a little bit lately, is the idea that there are people from all over the world continuing to find pyramids from all over the place, but they're covered over. They're covered by forests or by like layers of dirt, and everything else. And so people are discovering pyramids because they're looking at certain mountains and they're like, wait a second, that looks very symmetrical. I wonder if this is a pyramid. And so it very well could be. And this is how pyramids are getting discovered nowadays. They're looking at mountains and they're thinking that maybe, perhaps, it looks designed, right? But it's just covered up. And so I think it's interesting that the pyramid was more than likely inspired or influenced by actual real mountains, the holy mountain. And then some of them, over who knows how long, are now literally turning into mountains, right? And people don't even know maybe that they're walking on a pyramid or hiking on a pyramid, but in actuality, that's what it is. It's not just a normal mountain. So, anyways, just a few thoughts there. Right. Also, last thing, he's crossing his arms. So again, the cross, right? And then I just have to point out that down below you see hey, but then on the right hand side you see the circumpunct. So this sacred center symbol, which I correspond with the north. I think it was a geocentric symbol before it became a heliocentric solar based symbol. And once again, the sun is exalted in Aries. So this is Barbara Walker's deck from 1986, and I've sung the praises of Barbara Walker many times on this channel, but I'll do it again because I appreciate her work so much. But Barbara Walker is a fantastic author, and it's actually really interesting because she has books related to symbolism, a lot of symbolism related to the sacred feminine, and she also has knitting books. She's like a world class knitter, and she created a lot of knitting patterns. And my understanding is that people who take their knitting really seriously have Barbara Walker's books around. As I learned when I was at a friend's place, and his wife was a knitter. And so I just thought it was interesting. I'm like, this is the same woman. She designed a tarot deck. She has all of these mythological and really excellent symbolic reference books, and then she also has these knitting books. That's cool. So anyway, Barbara Walker, she is fantastic. So there you see perhaps there in the lower right hand version of the card, BGW, Barbara Walker. Pretty classic stuff here. She has the cubic stone throne sort of thing intact. She has the shield present, which is common. He is crossing his legs, as I mentioned earlier, being a thing with a lot of older tarot decks. He appears to be on the top of some sort of fortress or castle as well. So even fortress, right? The number 4. And then to me, it's a little more symbolic than some of the other decks, but it does appear as though he may represent this middle way or symbolic central mountain, because you have these two mountains on the side and he is right there front and center. The important thing that I want to note here that I think is fascinating, and we'll see it be shown and expressed in a few other decks as we move forward, is this the symbol on top of his head and then the symbol on top of the scepter, which looks very much to me like the fleur de lis, right? And I've broken this symbol down in a few different videos, and I see ultimately what I think it represents. I think it's almost kind of like a Western Shiva lingam. It's both the masculine and the feminine. So that middle point there, I think, would be the masculine, the phallus, and then the two petals on the side would be the feminine. So it would be like the masculine coming out of the feminine. And so this is why this symbol too, I see a huge correspondence with the fleur de lis and Virgo, right? Which I've broken down in some other videos, because there's this old myth of women being given a flower and then having a virgin birth, basically. And the same thing happened to the Virgin Mary. And there's reason to believe that the same thing symbolically happened with Virgo as well, is that she was given a flower. Fleur de lis, I believe, is a reference to the lily. And then once she was given this flower, she was able to give birth. Generally, too, it's always a male. And so a lot of these, excuse me, a lot of these virgin birth storylines, the woman gives birth to a male, kind of to her male counterpart. But the really interesting thing about the fleur de lis is when you start looking into older compasses and compass roses, the fleur de lis always denotes the north. So older compasses, you will see the fleur-de-lis as the northern arrow, basically. Or in the compass rose, you will see the fleur-de-lis as the northern arrow. Sometimes it's really emphasized too. And so if you want to see examples of that, if you go to my video page, my episode 1 of what is Northern Symbolism gets into some of that. And so I just think it's curious that he has two fleur-de-lis. They're kind of inverted too, by the way. The one on top of the scepter is red, right? And then the one on top of his hat is yellow. So there is this kind of duality, polarity sort of thing going on. But I think it has to do with kind of the generative thematic aspects related to the North, like it being the Garden of Eden, it being once paradise, all of these different things, all of these different ideas. So that's how I tend to personally see it. And once again, we'll see other cards where the fleur-de-lis is very, very present and noticeable, like the Crowley deck, like the Thoth deck. He chooses to put the fleur-de-lis on the floor, I believe, and there's 2 or 3 on the floor. The other thing I'll say is regarding this emperor and how he's wearing like leotard, like a leotard, and right, and it's just interesting because he's not wearing armor. He's wearing this very slim fitting outfit. He doesn't look like he's fit for battle. It doesn't look like he's about to defend, his homeland or be a general or anything like that. So to me, this is alluding to this feminine principle that the emperor is actually, in these older decks, incredibly feminine. So this is just like a little hint of that, actually. Which I think is kind of a curious little detail, versus some of the other Emperor cards. He's actually wearing some armor and whatnot. Not here. This guy looks like he's about to like act in a play or something. So anyways, so there's that. But once again, that is Barbara Walker from 1986. And we're moving on to the Morgan Greer deck from 1979. And I love this deck. This is one of my favorite decks. I just love how bold everything is. Everything looks very solid. And so the Emperor is like no different. Look how solid he looks. He is throned. There is this mountain range behind him. That eagle is very, very prominent. He's holding that sword in his left hand. And then he has that scepter with the Globus Cruciger symbol in his right hand. There's another eagle or bird, on his hat or crown. He has the classic white beard. He himself is wearing, it appears as though he's wearing body armor, right? And then you could see the ram too, at the end of the arm of the chair and everything. So, and once again, his legs, they're crossed and they're exposed, right? And so this idea of the emperor, I think this is a good time to get into it. But the emperor being throned, I think, is a very curious sort of idea or concept. And believe it or not, this is actually lending itself towards sacred feminine symbolism. So one of the things I really appreciate about the Thoth deck is the fact that when you're looking at the queens and kings, the queens are throned, but the kings or knights in that deck, they're on horseback. And so when you're looking at the court card system, the only figure that's throned is the queen, which I think is really interesting because it just reminds me of the fact that a woman is so magnetic in so many different ways that she can rule domestically and she can bring things into her fold. She can, she can rule in the confines of her castle or within her home, within her region or property, whereas the man generally, traditionally, is expected to quote unquote go out and get the bacon. It's the man that goes on these journeys and goes on these quests, if you will. And so just look at how our sexual organs function. It's the sperm that leaves home and goes to a foreign land to inseminate the egg. It's the egg that stays within the confines of woman. And so I think that, to me, symbolically, it makes a lot of sense that men generally are travelers and women generally are the ones who are more so domestic, taking care of the children, taking care of the home, things of that sort. It reminds me a lot. My classic example of this is the beehive, and the fact that the queen bee stays within the hive, and then it's the worker bees who go out and collect the pollen and do all of this work in service of the queen. So when I see the emperor being throned with his legs crossed, to me, this is alluding to feminine symbolism. It's very, very subtle, but that's kind of what I get out of this, that he's kind of, in a way, acting kind of like a queen. So just thought I would throw that out there. Once you notice this as kind of like an idea, to me, it really makes a lot of sense. Symbolically, just another example of this would be the bow and arrow. And so it makes a lot of sense that the bow itself is very feminine, right? It's very receptive, it's curvy. And then it would make sense that the arrow is masculine, it's phallic. And so with the bow and arrow, it's the bow that stays with the archer, and then it's the arrow that takes off. It's the phallic object, the arrow itself, that actually leaves and travels. So I think that that's just kind of another example of what I'm trying to get at here. So I hope that makes sense. Right. So this is the Hermetic Tarot from 1979 as well. Look how completely different these styles are. And they came out from the same year, which, obviously there's millions of ways to create these cards and whatever. But I just love the contrast just from what we just saw to what we see here. So this is the Emperor, right? And so one of the reasons why I love this deck is because it actually shows you at least just one of the alternative hermetic titles of the card. And so one of the alternative titles is Son of the Morning. And I always find these titles to be very, very helpful. And so a lot of times when I'm going through, the signs, that is like, this is one of the first cards I'll pull out just to see what the alternative title is. Son of the Morning, right? And so this reminds me of a few things. One, morning is obviously when the sun rises. As I've been saying, the sun is exalted in Aries. And then also just the idea of mourning, right? It reminds me of mourning as in mourning a death. So is it morning as in morning, like the time of day? Or is it son of the morning, Mourning, right? And so Mars corresponds with Aries, and Mars brings with it a lot of death, right? War. It's the planet of war. And so I just think that could be an interesting thing to think about. Son of the morning. Which morning is it implying? I obviously know it's spelled like the time of day, but it's just something to consider, something to think about. One of the things relating this card to the number 4 are those 4 sets of spheres that are seemingly either emanating from what looks kind of like a black sun or going towards that black sun. Still not sure exactly, honestly, quite what to make of it. And that tends to be one of my general responses with this card and this deck entirely, actually, is that there are a lot of things going on in this deck that I'm still like figuring out and trying to wrap my head around. And there are kind of like some of the other decks that I've talked about, the quality completely varies with this deck because there are some cards that are like incredible, amazing. And then there's other cards that are like not so much. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But this is a classic deck. A lot of people really like it. Notice that the Emperor has one of his feet on what appears to be like a bee or like a wasp or yellow jacket. That makes a lot of sense. And so kind of like what I was saying earlier too regarding the worker bee, right? You're going to see other bee symbolism in other decks later on in the presentation. It looks as though that ram head on the left it's like a sacrificial ram, right? It almost looks like its head was just it was decapitated and then it was just stuck on whatever that tower is. Um, and then you can see that there's a flag just below that to the left of the emperor. Flag symbolism kind of plays a part with the emperor card. You're going to see that in the Crowley Thoth deck. You're going to see that the lamb is holding a flag. And then you're going to see that they're even kind of alluding to this flag with how the emperor is holding his wand. And then down below, you see what appears to be an eagle. And then on the left, you see a globus cruciger, and then you see a series of these spheres kind of going off into the distance, right? And, this is more of a subliminal sort of thing, but when I look at the spheres down below, they kind of remind me of cannonballs. And as I was saying earlier, the globus cruciger is sometimes referred to as the holy hand grenade. And so it makes me wonder if these spheres are alluding to, instruments of war of some kind, cannonballs, or even, bullets and stuff from like way back when and everything. I'm not sure, but I just thought I would throw that out there. So yeah, once again, this is the Hermetic Tarot from 1979. Also, I just have to point out, he is doing the kind of classic as above, so below sort of thing. It's a bit of a different position than how it's usually done, like in the Magician card or with Baphomet or whatever. But he's definitely doing it. His left hand is, more of an expression of the above, and then his right hand is an expression of the below. And it looks as though he's pinching the horn of the ram. And horn symbolism, you're getting into phallic symbolism basically. And so he's like pinching a phallic object with his right hand, and then he's holding a phallic object, arguably in his left hand. All right, so this is the Marty Jaeger deck from 1975. I bought this used at a tarot conference. There was this, or there is a conference in Portland, Oregon. We're lucky to have it, called the Northwest Tarot Symposium. And guys, I mean, like probably half of these decks, honestly, I got from that symposium. And so there were a few amazing sellers there. And there is one booth in particular that sold really cool used decks. And this is the deck that at one point I bought from them. And he said that in the tarot community that this deck is referred to as the Naked Jaeger because a lot of the figures are nude and bare all, right? And so there's an interesting take, though, with a lot of the cards that Marty Jaeger illustrated or painted. And so this one is like an example of that. It's very different from a lot of other Emperor cards. So notice the amount of black, right, within this card. It really kind of creates this interesting contrast between the Emperor and that bird, and then what's going on in the background. You see the symbolic cube, right, that he's sitting on as well. In this way, it kind of reminds me of the Kaaba cube in Mecca, right? And so the Kaaba cube in Mecca is like gold and black. It's predominantly black with like some gold detail or gold trim. And so when I see this, just like on a subconscious subliminal level, I think of the Kaaba cube, and the Kaaba cube being a sacred center. And again, the emperor kind of in and of itself being a representation of this sacred center or this sacred mountain that brings order to the cosmos. That's what the world axis represents. And so this is what I've been getting into as well, is that the sacred holy mountain, this central mountain, Mount Meru, is symbolic of the world axis. And one of the most important things about the world axis is that it brings order and it brings stability. And so that's just kind of what I'm picking up. And that's what the Kaaba cube, to me, also represents in so many different ways. All sacred centers kind of have a similar sort of function there. And so here you see this very long sort of staff, but I love the fact that it's actually a perch for that bird. I think that's very interesting. You see the classic sort of Venusian symbol, or a kind of Ankh-like symbol there, right? One detail that I think is fascinating that I noticed when I was getting ready for this presentation is it appears as though his left arm is like cut off. Um, and you can kind of make the case that it's being hidden by the shadow, right? And that his arm is there and it's holding that orb that he has before him. But I don't know. To me, I wonder if he's actually kind of playing this little trick where if you just kind of glance at it, you would just assume that his left arm is present and it's there and it must be there. Why would it be cut off? But then on the other hand, it makes me wonder if he's actually playing a subliminal sort of trick here and actually it is cut off, because even when you zoom into that area of the card, like what I'm doing right now, there's like no indication that his arm is present. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? And then what do you think about that symbolically? What is he alluding to with that? Is he lose or did he lose an arm, right, in war? Is it to emphasize his right arm, and then that bird is his right hand man? Is this a commentary on the right hand path? His right hand holding that orb of light, or maybe it's like a sphere of selenite or something. So is this a commentary on the right hand path versus the left hand path? I don't know. I think it's really kind of curious though. So I'd be very curious to know what you guys think about it. His legs are crossed, and then he has that cross hanging from his foot. And yeah, I don't know. I think this is a really, really interesting card, though. And I totally encourage you guys to check out the rest of the deck if you've never seen it before. There's some really, really amazing illustrations within it, some amazing paintings. And then you can see, too, that there are, like inscriptions or engravings on the bottom of the card with the floor. To me, I see some T's, like the Tau cross. I see some arrows, very phallic. I see a ram, and then I see what looks like two circles with squares within them. So nonetheless, very, very interesting. Right, so this is the Thoth deck from 1943. So this is the Crowley deck, if you guys have never seen it before or are unaware of this artwork. Wow, I mean, this could be like a video in and of itself. It could be a presentation in and of itself. And I've had this card around for years now, but even just looking at it to prep for the presentation, it's just so many things were kind of coming to mind. But if you look on the left there, you'll see that there is a light ram and then there is a dark ram. The light ram is in, he's actually being like shined upon. And then the darker ram looks like he's within the shadow, right? And so the emperor is looking towards the dark ram. Isn't it kind of interesting that we were just dealing with this idea of light and darkness? And then here we kind of see, kind of a similar sort of theme going on here between light and dark. And so he's looking towards that ram, the darker ram. Also, too, since we're just talking about that area of the card, notice that they really try to emphasize the connection between solar energy and the crown. And so you see that the rays of the sun look like the rays of the crown, right? How it just extends upward. So that's like a very deliberate sort of thing. And then also son of the morning, right? So sun, SONSUN. I think that's really interesting. And then you see two like discs or coins, one to the left and then one to the right, beside the emperor. And then clearly, I mean, look at the color palette too. It's so orange and yellow, right? Very, very fiery, very, very warm, right? Very appropriate. You've got more bees on his actual like costume or jacket. He's holding that Globus Cruciger in one hand, and then he's holding that wand in the other hand. His legs are very clearly crossed. And when you're reading about this card from the Lon Milo Duquette deck about this, Lon Milo Duquette book about this deck, he is saying that what Crowley and Lady Frida Harris, what they were trying to do is that they were trying to embed the symbol for sulfur, using his crossed legs as the cross and then using his upper portion of his body as that triangle. And so they're alluding to sulfur by doing this, at least according to him. And then you see that shield there in the lower left, and you have that double-headed bird, that double-headed eagle or phoenix. And when I see a double-headed bird or eagle, I think about, once again, like, what is being created when these two energies come together. It, to me, is a representation of polarity or duality of a spectrum of some sort, positive, negative, masculine, feminine, however you want to look at it. And then when these two things come together, it creates a third thing. So to me, it's very much symbolic of like a trinity. So when a woman and a man come together, they can create a third thing, which would be a child. And so I see trinity symbolism with the double-headed eagle. On the right-hand side, you will see the lamb. And so this is like a very innocent lamb. A lot of times when you see a lamb holding a flag like this, it's a representation of Christ. And so again, Lamb of God. And these lambs are often associated with sacrifice or slaughter. And it gets into this whole idea of like, the more innocent something is, the more potent its sacrifice, basically. Kind of the whole idea of, sacrificing children or animals or things like that. So it's like, this is kind of relates to this idea of the first fruit or the firstborn as well. And that there have been traditions, in the Middle East and things like that, perhaps elsewhere, where like the firstborn child is what was sacrificed because it was your first fruit. It's a big deal. This is your first kid. And so it's an even more worthy sort of sacrifice. And a lot of this stuff ties into this time of year with Passover and Easter and things like that. And so there's a lot to be said regarding all of that, but that is the sacrificial lamb. And so notice, too, by the way, I mentioned it earlier, but notice the angle of the flag, and then notice the angle of the wand. And so I think what they're trying to say is that the emperor himself, he is the ram, right? He is this sacrificial lamb, basically. So he is this firstborn son, right? And so I think that that's kind of what's being alluded to here. Also, the feminine nature of like this card too is kind of there. And he's not wearing armor. He does look, like he has broad shoulders and things like that. But notice that even his feet, he's not even wearing shoes. He's not wearing shoes. He's not wearing armor. He's wearing what look like little socks or something, ankle socks, right? And so perhaps he's even wearing leggings or something, I don't know. But I think that this is kind of being alluded to, right? And then also the fleur-de-lis. Look, there's one fleur-de-lis on the left. It's within the rays of the sun, kind of how like that white ram is on the upper right. It's in that path of the rays. And then also on the right, you have another fleur-de-lis, and it is in the shadow of the sunlight. And so this is very interesting. The fact that it's very sophisticated. It's a very sophisticated painting because there's just so much going on that you can decode. And a lot of it is so subtle that you can very easily overlook it. So once again, the fleur-de-lis to me connotates virgin births, relating it to the feminine symbolism, also relating to the fact that he himself, the emperor or the sacrificial lamb or Christ, the first son, is a product of the virgin birth, right? And so also the fleur-de-lis being related to the north and denoting the north. And so whenever I see a flag pole or whenever I see a staff or a wand, I associate it with the world axis, which is at the north. And so, very, very subtle symbolism, but that's what I take away from it. And again, we could go on and on and on. And so to clarify once again, because I totally spaced it earlier, but Tazadi being related to this flip, and Hey being the original correspondence, and Tazadi meaning fishhook. And so again, it blows my mind. We go from Pisces, the very end of the zodiac, related to fish, related to water, and then we transition to Aries with the spring equinox. And we're like, the way I used to say it is that it's almost as though this fishhook symbolism with Tazadi is that we're being yanked out of the ethereal waters into the realm of light when the sun returns. Okay, so the Rider-Waite from 1909. It's kind of nuts that it's even from 1909. I kind of forget that sometimes. Wild. And so it's, over 100 years old, and yet this imagery and artwork is still like very, very much like a thing. And anyone who's into tarot likely has this deck. It's the most classic deck around. It changed the game in many, many different respects. But this is the card, right, that I had for the thumbnail. And so here you can see the Emperor appears as though he is a central mountain. And for the most part, we've pretty much gone over all of this symbolism. The one thing I'll say that's really easy to miss is that there is it's like a river. And because in comparison to the size of the mountain, and you can imagine it being far away, that there is a river that is kind of crossing through the bottom portion of the throne there. And so there's just this light hint of water. So there is this implied, very, very subtle feminine sort of symbolism going on, this light sort of flow. And so that's something that I think could be very easily missed. And even with this reproduction of the card, it looks as though they did not color the right side of the river in, and it's just brown. So even, it's even easier to miss kind of given that. But the whole thing though, about the Emperor having his legs exposed, what I kind of take from it is that, to me, it kind of says that he is perhaps ready to go, that he's not completely settled, that he is sitting there, he is throned, obviously, but he is, maybe like positioning himself so that he can leave and can travel and conquest and conquer should he need to. Should he have to get up and do something, he can do it. But that for the most part, he is settled. But even I would say the armor kind of implies that. Why would you need to wear armor if you're just sitting on the throne all day? It appears as though that he still is active, and that he can still be that emperor and maybe general, and can have his own boots on the ground and go assess a situation or whatever the case might be. But that's kind of what I get from it, is that there's an implied, very subtle mobility sort of aspect there, saying that, hey, yeah, he's throned for sure. He's sitting down. He's comfortable. He can rule from the confines of his chair. But his true essence, his true nature, as I was saying earlier, is actually to get up and go, is to actually travel, bring home the bacon, and do that whole thing. So that's what I see. But if you see something else, I would love to know. All right, so we're getting to some of the older cards now, which is always fun. So this is the Soprafino deck. It's from 1835. And yeah, so here you see an emperor, and he looks like he's living a lavish, luxurious lifestyle. I mean, just look at that crown. look at his armor, the detail within the armor, look at just what he's wearing. And also, I think to me, the big kicker of how luxurious of a lifestyle he's living, his right foot is on a pillow. So, I mean, yeah, very, very comfortable sort of lifestyle here. And so I think we're getting, to me, towards some of the more overt feminine kind of symbolism. You know, he doesn't look like a warrior. He doesn't look like a general. He doesn't look like he's going to go kick any ass anytime soon. He looks very comfortable with his position, with where he's at, you know. And so, again, these older decks really, really emphasize that. At least a few of them really, really emphasize the feminine nature of things. And everybody knows, too, it's like when you look at some of these older kings and stuff, how effeminate their costumes are, and they wear makeup and wigs and, like, you know, things like that. So I guess in many ways it shouldn't be that big of a surprise, but, like, you know, it looks like he lives a decadent sort of lifestyle. So here he holds a wand, and then the wand up top has the double-headed eagle. It's not uncommon to see the double-headed eagle being you know, kind of brought together with a crown, right? And then you could see it's very, very slight because the detail is just so small. But even on top of that little crown in between the double-headed eagle, you see that Globus Cruciger upside down Venus glyph, right? And so once again, double-headed eagle, I always think of like this third sort of thing, a third creation. The two, from the one comes the two, and then the two creates a third sort of thing. So yeah, I think you guys kind of get the idea behind everything that's going on here. So lots of fantastic detail in this deck overall. I love it. I think it's awesome. There's some really, really killer cards in this deck, but the feminine nature of things is definitely starting to come out now. So this deck has an interesting name to it, the 1JJ Tarot. And so this comes from 1831. And so regarding kind of this feminine sort of thing, notice that he is throned, he's sitting, but he's not even sitting very upright. And he doesn't look very proud either, I would say, personally. He looks a little unsure to me, mostly just because of his posture. You know, it's almost like he's listening to somebody or paying attention to something else. He's not embodying his own power. You know, who is he looking at? You know, what is he paying attention to? Is he really in charge, or is there someone else in charge? You know, is the queen in charge? Is the queen yelling at him or something? And so also notice how big his eyes are, and kind of like they almost look like, I don't know, there's a he just doesn't look intimidating. He doesn't look, you know, like a person that you can't mess with or whatever. He looks like a decent size, you know, but he's not implying you know, a kind of nature that I think would come with an emperor. It's a little more feminine. He even it almost looks as though like they tried to emphasize his eyelashes too. There's something feminine about his eyes, I would say. But generally, you know, a lot of the other symbolism is kind of present. He has his staff, and then he's wearing you know, clothing of the era, right? And then there is that shield over there. And what does it say? Fabrique Descartes, J. Mueller, and I don't know what that is. But maybe someone out there does, or maybe someone can look into it and see what's going on with all of that. There's no background to speak of. On top of his crown, you do see kind of a little Globus Cruciger sort of thing, Mars symbol there, right? So I don't know, very interesting. But I think that lean is, I think it's saying a lot actually, and the posture of the figure within any tarot card. There's so many secrets to break down just from these simple little things. You know, he's, again, he doesn't have a very strong posture. He's leaning into something. He's looking away. You know, even his wand is leaning in that direction as well. To me, there's an implication here that he is either giving away his power or that he's not fully in control. And so that's personally what I pick up. And so I just think that's a curious detail. So that is the one J.J. Tarot from 1831. And so this is the Tarot Neoclassico from 1810. And I mean, this might be one of the most overt feminine emperor cards that I have in my deck. And so for a few different reasons. But notice, I mean, look at his posture. Look what he's doing. He looks like a ballerina or something, right? And so he's balancing on one foot. And I've gotten into 1 foot and one-legged symbolism before. And to me, it's always symbolic of like the world axis. That's what I've come across. That's what my research has led me to understand. And so even like a ballerina who twirls around, that 1 foot, that 1 foot is symbolic of an axis of rotation, as in the world axis, basically. He has his left hand at his hip in a very feminine sort of way, right? He doesn't look as though he's going to be fighting or defending or anything anytime soon. And I think that this is just so overt that they were trying to imply the feminine nature of the emperor in this card. From the posture of his hand to the posture of his body, the fact that he's on 1 foot. If you're a warrior or you are someone who really embodies strength and stability and order, being on 1 foot does not sort of allude to that at all. It looks like he can be tipped over, right? So he's not standing firm, right? And so it doesn't appear as though then, too, with this posture, that he has that he's grounded, And so there's all of that. But also notice the detail of the pillar that has fallen over on the left-hand side. So I've gotten into this as well. The idea of a broken pillar or a fallen pillar being very, very feminine and being related to chaos. And so one of the images that I love to talk about is the Weeping Virgin. And so it's a young maiden who's symbolic of Virgo, and she is standing just behind a broken pillar, right? So there's a whole tradition associating kind of the sacred feminine, Virgo, or chaos, which I associate with the feminine, the sacred feminine. And again, chaos is like not a bad thing. It's what everything is made of. It's like, order ab chao. Order, the order of this world came out of chaos, this primordial chaos. And so here you're seeing the emperor being associated with this feminine, chaotic sort of energy. So the broken pillar is emblematic of chaos, but the solid pillar, the upright, complete pillar, is more so symbolic of order itself. And so perhaps even maybe this is what they're alluding to, is that maybe he is that pillar. Maybe he's the upright pillar and his wand kind of perhaps suggests that. But they're showing you the contrast with the broken pillar. But I think more so they're alluding to the feminine nature of the emperor and this card. And so that's what I see here. Also, too, just to kind of maybe completely fully highlight this idea of the broken pillar being feminine, just look at the I Ching. And the I Ching uses hexagrams that are made up of trigrams that are made up of lines. And there's only 2 lines. There's the yin and then there's the yang. The yang, the masculine, is a unbroken line. So it's a complete horizontal line. And then the yin is a broken line. So it's more passive. Something can actually pass through that line. And so that's what the whole I Ching system is about. It's about yin and yang, the broken line and then the unbroken line. And so this speaks to what I'm talking about, is that the broken pillar, feminine, yin, the complete pillar is more yang and more masculine. And so anyway, so as I was saying, I think that this is perhaps the most overt example of linking the feminine with this card, which again is totally classic for tarot. You're going to see this, in multiple cards. One of the other examples of just kind of flipping things on its head symbolically is the Strength card, and how we associate Leo with the Strength card, and we associate Leo with being very, very powerful and very, very strong. He's the king of the jungle. He's a badass. All of these different types of things. Yet in the Strength card, he is weak and he's submissive and he has his tail between his legs. And a woman is actually taming him. And so this is a classic thing you're going to see all over the place within tarot. Kind of just these like really simple inversions, I think, that are symbolically very, very potent. All right, so moving on. Okay, so this is the Marseille from 1709. And I made a note here to see if there was a subliminal or hidden compass embedded within his helmet, and it is not there. Instead, you kind of see what's supposed to be maybe like at the top a Globus Cruciger thing. But it looks like maybe one of the lines didn't get printed or something along those lines. Anyway, but otherwise, we've pretty much talked about most everything here, because that's just the point we're at in the presentation. But yeah, classic card. I love this particular release of it, and just kind of how they just scanned, one version of this deck and they just printed it as is. So I just love kind of how messy some of the colors are and some of the line work. How it just looks very, it looks like a woodcut sort of thing. It looks very organic and handmade. But yeah, classic deck. All right, so this deck also has an interesting name. So whenever I see it around, I always see it being referred to as the Engravings Sec 18 deck. And SEC is SEC period. I don't know what that means. Maybe you guys know. But Engravings 18 from the 18th century. And so now that we're like at the last, like how many decks are left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's, including this deck, there's 5 decks left. And it's actually hard to get like precise dates on their release, for obvious reasons. And so some of these are just very general, like 18th century. I don't know if anybody knows exactly when it was created, right? But I actually just made a post about this on my Instagram and elsewhere. But this is very interesting. This is another example of, in my opinion, it's alluding to the sacred feminine, because what you're seeing here is like a version of Zeus, right? It looks like it's supposed to be Zeus, Jupiter, and you see the eagle right there next to him. And he's holding the goddess Nike, who is associated with victory. And oftentimes she's holding a crown in one hand. And then I believe in her right hand, what you're seeing is, I think it's more than likely a date palm branch or a palm branch. So it's a branch. And so when you see a woman holding a branch like that, that branch is symbolic of child, actually. And so you'll see this with Virgo. Virgo is oftentimes holding either wheat or branch. And in both cases, in my opinion, what they're doing is that, or what's been done with this idea, is that instead of showing Virgo with child, they're showing Virgo with a symbolic child. And Christ was known as the branch. That's just one of his many nicknames. And so that's what I see. Whenever I see a woman holding a branch, again, usually it's like a palm branch. And again, palm symbolism, like right now with this time of year, there's a lot to be said about that. Palm Sunday and things like that. But she's symbolic of the Queen of Heaven. And so it's interesting, because my understanding is that this original setup of someone being throned holding like a symbolic child or a symbolic partner, but a little person with, that they're holding in their hand, that the original version of this is actually of a woman being throned holding her child. So it's really, it's no different than a lot of classic paintings and illustrations and iconography of a woman holding child, basically. But here it's flipped on its head. It's man holding woman, not woman holding man. And there are statues of Zeus doing this exact same sort of thing. And I just think it's really interesting because here there are examples of either a man holding woman or a woman holding man. But I don't think personally I've ever seen a man holding a man or a woman holding a man. And my understanding, once again, is that the oldest versions of this artwork is always woman holding child. And if you look at, there's a constellation called Coma Berenices. Nowadays, it is a wig. It's literally like a wig of hair, but before that, and it's very close to Virgo, by the way. There's some versions when you're looking at these older sky maps, you'll see Virgo pointing in a direction. I believe it's a more northern direction, and she's pointing, and sometimes she's pointing at nothing, but sometimes that nothingness is filled with a constellation. And again, in modern sky maps, what you're going to see is a wig of hair. But way, way back when, it wasn't a wig of hair. It was actually a woman throned, very much like this, holding her son. And the whole idea was that she was holding the desired son of nations. And the idea is basically that it's a representation of Isis, the woman, the divine sacred feminine being throned, holding her child, holding her creation, right? The first masculine sort of energy, right? And that's kind of like what Sophia and the Demiurge is all about, is that the Queen of Heaven, deep within her, and this is what Virgo symbolism is all about too, is that deep within her, she found and created her own masculine sort of counterpart, that she has a series of veils, and that within her essence, she unveiled the light. She unveiled this child. This child came to be. And the demiurge corresponds with the sun, right? And everything else. So anyway, so I see subtle feminine symbolism here. And because the roles are reversed. And so I think when you see Zeus doing this, holding Nike, I think that's what they're doing too, is that they're actually showing Zeus in a feminine role, and they're flipping the script, if you will. And if I'm not mistaken too, there are versions of Zeus being expressed as a woman, right? Maybe someone can clarify that. But this simple setup, if you weren't aware of Coma Berenices, if you weren't aware of like Isis and Horus, or mother and child, if you weren't aware of like the Virgin Mary holding child, and if you didn't know that that was related to these older illustrations, I think you can kind of miss some of the symbolism. But that's just what I'm picking up, basically. And so, so that's what I see. I'd be very curious to know your guys' thoughts behind that one. So again, I'm not even going to say the name because it does not roll off the tongue. But this is from the 18th century. And also notice that he's in the heavens too, right? So this sky father, sky daddy sort of character, Jehovah sort of thing, Zeus, right? So yeah, so that's what I got. So the next one we have here is, and forgive me because I'm probably going to butcher it, but Tarot de Jacques Viville from 1650. I included it because this is just part of my collection, and there are some cards that reveal quite a bit of information that I have not seen anywhere else. And so for that reason, I thought it was worth picking up. But honestly, what you see here is pretty much just kind of a representation of everything else we've seen. I'm personally, I'm not seeing too many details here that I think are worth unpacking. It's pretty much classic imagery. And even it's kind of a little bit more abstract, and maybe perhaps a little bit more crude than some other versions. But I just included it because it is part of my collection. And like I said, there are other cards that I think really convey a lot of interesting information, but I don't really think this is one of them. It's pretty standard fare. But I do think, and I'm having a good time doing this, I think it makes sense to maybe do this for every single sign. And so every single sign, you'll see all of these different versions. And also, as I get new decks, I will definitely include them. Right. So this is the Montaigne Tarot from the 15th century. And this, to me, I love the artwork in this deck. And actually, there's two cards that I'm showing here. I think this is the only deck I'm doing that for, but there's two cards that make sense to relate to the Emperor. This is the Emperor card, though, specifically. And so here you can see that it's the ninth card. And this deck is actually a major arcana kind of deck. I don't know how many cards there are. If I had to guess, I would guess maybe there's like 30 something cards, and they're fairly good size as well. And when you're looking at this card, you see some of the classic symbolism, right? That we've been going over with the Emperor. But because it's not a standard major arcana, there's a couple of cards where, depending on what sign you're researching or what whatever you're looking into, there's a couple of cards that actually are worth bringing up in discussion. So this is just the Emperor card, not the fourth card, but the ninth card. And here you see him looking at this ball. There's no cross on top of it, but doesn't it look like there's a longing? Doesn't it look like he's like sad, or that he's like reminiscing, or that he's depressed for some reason? To me, it's almost as though he's holding this sphere, and this sphere is symbolic of power, but it doesn't look like he's happy. To me, it almost looks like there's some sort of conflict going on here, with how he's interpreting his role, in wherever he lives, and his role in life, and what he's chosen to do or not do. And maybe too, it's a commentary on the elites, right? And elites just, oftentimes, because they have so much influence and so much money, and because they're not really connected, I guess, with the people, arguably you could say maybe that they're not connected with themselves, and that this sort of lifestyle of being an emperor, it's not what it's all cracked up to be. And so I just kind of see this depressive sort of energy coming off of this figure here. And then also, he is holding his waistband, he's holding his belt. And so to me, it's almost like, I almost feel as though what they've done with this card is like they've drained him of his masculine energy. So again, he's not upright. He's kind of hunched over. He has poor posture. He's holding onto the waistband. To me, the waistband, as I was saying earlier, like your gut instincts, it's addressing his midsection, the waistband being circular in nature. So it's a little more feminine, I would say. And then also the globe too being more feminine. And so, and then even the bird down below, he's not spreading his wings, right? He doesn't look very formidable. He doesn't look very large or thick or anything like that. And then also too, another thing that's very feminine, there's several things. One, his hair, I would say it's wavy. And then even there's the fabric behind him, and look how he's almost like drowning in fabric, honestly. And so all of the little details within the fabric, of making sure that the folds look appropriate and stuff, it's very, very feminine. And then also too, notice that there are these implied sort of like watery lines with his throne at the very bottom. So even more watery sort of symbolism. So to me, it's almost like a man kind of being zapped of his masculine energy and being surrounded by a lot of feminine sort of symbolism. And so that's kind of what I pick up. And so this is again in theme with all of the other things I've been saying. Also, to his crown, perhaps you could say that there are implied, like, or that this is maybe a simpler fleur de lis sort of thing around his crown as well, getting into some of the stuff that I was saying earlier. But this is an interesting deck. I love it. And then also the other card that I think makes a lot of sense would be literally just to pull the Jupiter card. And so Jupiter, as I've been saying, definitely has a correspondence with Aries, as does Mars, as does the Sun. And here you see Jupiter, and this is okay, so there's at least 40 something cards here. So maybe it's even bigger than I thought. Maybe there are like 50 cards. But this is the 46th card. And Jupiter is within a Vesica Pisces, a yoni shape, right? This is a vaginal sort of symbolic thing, this frame that he's within. And so here you have Jupiter within the Vesica Pisces, and he is pointing his arrow downward, and it looks like he has killed people. It looks like he is present just after some sort of war or some sort of conflict. And then obviously things don't look good for that little girl down there, right? And so here you see, though, look at the contrast with the birds, right? With this eagle. Look how proud this eagle looks. And it's looking down. Both of the figures are looking down. So they're looking down from the heavens, from the sky, again, Sky Father. And so they have a position that's at a higher vantage point, right? And so they're looking down at the people, and perhaps it's like this trickle down sort of thing. So it's the gods have their way with the people down below, right? And they use the common folk to their advantage for whatever purpose they might want them for. And so anyway, so I thought this was worth including clearly, and really it's an interesting take on the energy of Jupiter for sure. And all of the planetary correspondences with this deck are very, very intriguing, and all of the other cards that overlap with the major arcana are worth checking out for sure. So this is the Montaigne Tarot from the 15th century. And then here we have the Visconti Sforza from the 15th century as well. And these last three decks, by the way, there's one more after this. They are all from the 15th century, but I don't know which one actually came first. And I don't know if anyone out there actually knows which one came first. But here you see a more classic interpretation of the Emperor. And it looks like there's just a lot of brown here, but in actuality, in real life, these are gold foil. And so all of the brown that you see, if I'm not mistaken, is actually gold foil. But the version I have, literally, it's just printed on cardstock. So there's no gold foil, but you could imagine that it just would have a different sort of quality looking at an original version. But there he is holding the globe or the sphere in his left hand, and then he has what looks like a wand right in his right hand. So again, a perfect pairing expressing masculine and feminine symbolism. He also has that nice long white beard. He is throned as well. And then you can see that it must be either a griffin or an eagle on his hat there. But otherwise, pretty straightforward. Nothing too crazy going on. That platform is kind of curious. I wonder how many sides that platform has. And then it looks as though there is some nature in the background on the right-hand side. Right. But otherwise, I mean, it's almost kind of like everything is kind of being drowned out by that gold foil, by that brown color. He looks very tall, by the way. I mean, just kind of look at his, and I know when you're like breaking down artwork from back in the day, there can be goofy things with like proportions and perspective and whatever. But I mean, just kind of look at where his head is and then look at where his knees are, right? Proportionally, it looks like the upper half of his body is much taller than the lower half of his body. So I kind of wonder if that's deliberate or not. Right. So this is actually the last card in my collection. This is the Solabuska from the 15th century as well. And it is not called the Emperor. It is the fourth card, but it is actually called Mario, which when I first got this deck and I came across this card and it's just named Mario, and I had already known that Mario relates to Mars. I believe it means mighty warrior, essentially. I was just like, it kind of like blew me away a little bit. I'm like, I never thought I would have my own tarot card, but here we are. And so this deck is such a classic deck, guys, that I mean, literally, this deck is from the 15th century, and all of the minor cards are illustrated, like graphically. And it's not just like coins and like wands and swords. It's like there are full scenes. And so a lot of people think that that didn't really happen until the Rider Waite deck, but actually this was the first deck to do it, and it's one of the oldest decks out there. And this deck is really, really mysterious. I mean, there's just so many things going on with it. Um, that are very, very intriguing. And people have said that it's a very malefic deck, that it was created by a family, it was commissioned by a family, and that they were essentially black magicians, and that they encoded it with things in order for them to, it was kind of like an aid for some of their workings that they were doing and whatever. So there are cards in this deck that show child sacrifice as an example. There's cards in this deck that have like, there's like deformities and things. There's nudity in this deck, very strange nudity in this deck. There's lots of homoerotic stuff going on in this deck as well. If you've never seen the Solabuska, it's absolutely worth checking out. And I'm lucky enough to have like a really high quality copy around, and I just think it's very, very interesting. And the thing for me is that this deck, there are still secrets to be revealed. There are some works, one main book that has come out called The Game of Saturn, that breaks down a lot of the information with these cards. And I think it's great. I think it's interesting, but I think that there's more to be revealed. I think that there's more mysteries and secrets that literally nobody is aware of. No, at least they haven't published it, or they haven't brought it to light. And so if you're looking for like a really good puzzle and you're into decoding things, there's a lot going on here that I think would be interesting for the right person. And so one of the things with this deck is that all of the cards in the major arcana supposedly correspond with a historical figure. And so that's one thing that you'll notice, is that a lot of the cards are not named what you know them to be. It's not the Hermit card, or it's not whatever, the Universe card or World card or whatever. It's like they have different names. It's like referencing a general, or referencing a king, or referencing a priest, or something like that, some historical figure. And I am actually off the top of my head, I'm not sure who Mario is a reference to. And then even then, it's kind of speculative, I would say. There's like a Nebuchadnezzar card as well. And so there's a few famous people or figures throughout history that correspond with cards. So whoever this Mario figure is, I'm not sure, but he definitely corresponds with Mars. That's one thing that I feel like is pretty obvious. So notice that flag, right? We were talking about flag symbolism. You see that flag in the upper right. Here, this figure has a winged helmet. This very much corresponds him to Mercury, and Mercury is such a shapeshifter that you kind of see mercurial symbolism, I think all over the place. One of the other interesting details about this deck, by the way, is that a lot of the shields are basically like unreadable. And so it's very hard to see what was supposed to be on that shield, or what the shield illustration artwork was originally. And so I'm kind of under the impression, because also my understanding is that there's only one deck in survival. Like there's only one deck around. So this scan came from one deck. All versions of the Solobuska came from one deck. To me, I could see the case being made that either the shield was gold foil, or some sort of foil, metallic foil, and that it has chipped off over the years. I could also see the case being made that at some point these shields were scratched off. For what reason, I can't really say, but I think it's kind of intriguing, because this is something that you're going to see, if I'm not mistaken, throughout the whole entire deck, that all of the shields are kind of scratched off, and they're illegible. So you don't know what it's really saying. So there's that. So again, there's multi-layered, multifaceted mysteries with this deck. It's really, really intriguing. But the one thing that is so obvious here that I have to talk about is what's going on with that handle, with that sword. So to me, what I think is going on here is that handle is a symbol that represents a few different things. It's clearly positioned near his crotch, so it looks like a phallus. It looks like an erect phallus, subliminally. And that's the other thing with this deck. There are subliminal details in this deck that I've like never seen before. And so there are things going on here that are supposed to work on a subconscious sort of level, which is fascinating. And maybe I'll even do a presentation. If you guys want to see a presentation just on Solobuska cards, and I'll get into some of the more intriguing cards, or maybe we can even just look through the whole deck or something. I would be willing to do that, because I think that would be a good time. But that handle right there, you see at the tip of it, it almost looks like the horns of a ram, right? You can kind of see that, how maybe it's just like a really simple glyph of the horns of a ram, right? Well, it also looks a lot like a circumcision tool known as the Magen shield. And I might be saying that right. It might be Magen shield. I believe it's Magen shield. And this is a tool in circumcision that the Jews use in their circumcision rituals. And so there are circumcision kits out there that are basically like esoteric Jewish kits that are encoded with Hebrew letters, and they're all designed a very specific way. And there's a lot of symbolism attached to them. And I'll be damned if that shield doesn't kind of look like the handle of this sword, and it's right there acting as his phallus or penis. And the act of circumcision in and of itself has to do with Passover, and has to do with this idea of sacrifice. And as I've been saying, there's a major sacrificial component going on with Aries season. And so that is something that I can get into at some point. I know I've brought this up on other live streams and things like that, but I think that is the subliminal here, is that actually you're seeing, yes, it's the handle of the sword, but it's also his phallus, but it's also a circumcision tool. And so that's what I personally take away from it. And then I also think it's really interesting too, how this figure here, how he is like positioned. There are several cards in this deck where it basically looks like there's homoerotic sort of undertones going on. And guys, I mean, when you're dealing with there have been a lot of factions, in the Western world, like the Roman army, where that was kind of the deal, is that it was just, you guys had each other, and that was the culture. And that was also part of some of their, it was part of the some of the secret societies, like the cult of Mithras and things like that. That was just kind of how they rolled. And so I wonder if there's kind of like, if that's being implied. It almost looks like there's a branch, potentially, going up his ass, basically, if I'm just going to be overt with what I think might be going on. But knowing this deck, guys, it just would not be surprising. When you see some of the other artwork, it might make a little bit more sense. So, anyways, on that note, that is the last card I have. But I did want to show you guys my illustration of Aries, because we're going through the cards, because it's Aries season. Some of you guys don't know, but I've illustrated each astrological sign. And so I've printed 3 of them so far. And this is what my Aries illustration looks like. And so I have these available on my Etsy, by the way. So if you guys are interested, they all come signed and they all come with a study packet. If you guys are interested, you obviously can order one, but this is my interpretation of Aries. And I consider these illustrations, by the way, almost to be like living works of art. So, as an example, I can see some changes that I might make the next time I get a print run going. These are silk screened by hand, by the way. And so, I mean, this run that I've done with this illustration, like, this is the only run I'm going to do. If I do another run, it's going to be an updated version, and it's not more than likely probably going to be silk screened. But this is what I see with Aries season. So you could see a lot of the symbolism that we have gone over today is intact. So you see this figure symbolic of Aries holding the sacrificial lamb. I look at this figure very much related to like Zeus and Christ and things of that sort. And then here you see kind of like a sacred center on the top of his head. It almost looks like a wafer, which there's sacrificial connotations with the wafer being the body of Christ and Christ being sacrificed. And then the wafer actually has like a cross or a star, within it. And so to me, this is kind of like a sacred center sort of symbol. One of the things about sacrifice relating to Aries is just the nature of fire. If you want something to burn, something has to be sacrificed. So if you want a fire, something has to burn. So it's going to be more than likely wood. And so if you want to kickstart the new year and you want this energy to bring in the rest of the signs, if you want this energy to come through, that is like the yearly cycle, Aries is arguably sacrificed for this to even occur. So it's because of Aries' cardinal nature, this explosive sort of raw nature, that spring can even kind of like commence. So I just see a lot of sacrificial symbolism with fire, with Aries, and what has happened traditionally, during this time of year. And so for me, that is what symbolically is going on with his slit throat. One of the things for me, and this might even be something that if somebody is interested, obviously just order the print if you want. But one of the changes that I might make is that instead of having a blade, because I was trying to imply that Aries, it's a self-sacrifice, basically, not at the hands of anyone else, but to himself. And I kind of regret putting that blade in there in his right hand. And I actually might put a Magian shield, this circumcision tool in his right hand, alluding to some of the stuff that I had already brought up, right? And then I've also kind of debated whether or not the blood should even be there, or if it's too much. But this is just the energetic quality I see with Aries. There's lots of beautiful things with Aries, but to me, I feel like I need to express the sacrificial nature of everything, the Mars warlike nature of the sign. And so you could also see that there's a shield there, right, with the symbol for Aries. To the side of the shield, you'll see these sprouts, which look very much like the symbol for Aries. So this is alluding to, the nature of spring and, life is returning, the sun is returning. You can see even to the sides of that, you can see these fish hooks kind of relating to Zadi, like I was mentioning earlier. This fish hook correspondence with the Emperor card, and how it's really interesting that there's this fish hook relationship with Aries and the Emperor, and we just came out of Pisces, the fish, right? And so I think that there's something interesting going on there. And then you can also see some other sort of symbols relating to, the glyph of Aries, basically. So anyway, so yeah, that's my print, man. Hopefully you guys like it, and I still have a handful of copies left if you're interested. And I'm pretty sure in this description I have the link to my Etsy as well. All right, so guys, that is what I have. So I'm going to go through these slides here just to let people know what's good, what I have going on, how they can reach me, and then I'll check out the chat and see what's happening. So if any of you guys are interested in tarot readings, you can message me however you want to message me, whether it's through email, Instagram, whatever works. You can also text me. So a lot of people have been using that. So you can text me at 503-893-4606. I offer half-hour tarot readings for $50. I accept PayPal, CashApp, Venmo. I also do study sessions. And so study sessions are really fun. Tarot readings and study sessions both take place online. We actually set up a session and we meet via Google Meet. And so anyway, study sessions, if anybody out there is interested in learning more about the tarot, astrology, northern symbolism, anything, they can reach out. And basically it's kind of like a consultation, little workshop slash one-on-one class sort of thing. So I walk you through whatever it is you might be interested in. So I've had people reach out and they want me to review their artwork, or they've wanted a dream analysis. They've wanted to do, a study session based around the tarot, and they want to learn more about the major arcana. So I've done all sorts of different things for people, and it's really, really fun. I have a good time doing it. And if you want to have one-on-one time, that is the best way to do it. And if you got anything out of this presentation, I would love to see you guys join my Patreon. So patreon.com/symbolicstudies. A little goes a long way. So Patreon, that's one awesome way to support. Literally, it's so it's oversaid these days, but even just liking this video or commenting or subscribing, it all really does add up. So sending it to a friend who you think might be interested in this information. There's a number of ways to support for sure, but Patreon is a great way to do that. Also, all patrons get my study packet. So this is my elemental study packet. There's 4 pages. It's a PDF. And I literally, every single patron who signs up, I send you guys a personal message and I send you a link to download the study packet. And so I have one page for water, fire, air, and earth. And I have a bunch of different correspondences. You can see kind of what the layout looks like. And so I have keywords and concepts, the tarot suit, the playing card that associates with water in this example, the elemental that corresponds with water, the mathematical function that corresponds with water. I have the traditional triangular glyph or symbol, the circular symbol associated with all the elements, the platonic solid. I have, animals that are associated with each element, plants, gems and metals, mythology. And then I literally have a breakdown of each sign too, that is underneath that element. So in this case, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. I give you guys some information about that, the cell salt, the tarot card, all of that. One of my streams, maybe a few weeks ago, I said that if you leave a super chat, I can send you an elemental study packet. And I was surprised that YouTube doesn't give you any information on how to contact anyone who leaves a super chat. So there's a list, and I can go to your channel, but then there's like no like a DM feature, right, on YouTube. So if you leave a super chat of any amount, you will get a study packet, but you have to reach out and tell me, what your name was on YouTube, or you have to leave your email address. There has to be some sort of way that we can connect with each other. And so if you feel comfortable doing that, study packets, basically every Patreon person gets them. Anyone who orders a print gets it. A physical copy, which are like, I don't usually do that. I think at some point I will expand this elemental study packet down the road and offer physical copies, but the only way to get a physical copy right now is if you order a print. Or you can go to my website and you can donate any amount you want. It's a pay what you want sort of thing. So name your own price. It's a donation based thing. If you send any amount, via Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, whatever, all you have to do is just include your email address, and then I will send you this too. So if you're interested, there's a few ways of getting it. Also, too, Symbolic Studios. So I am a graphic designer, and I have been for a number of years. And I'm just letting people know that I do graphic design work. So I've done logos and websites and album covers and t-shirts and posters and all sorts of different things, over 20 years of doing design. So if you have a project in mind, if you have a business or an account that needs to be spruced up, I've done social media stuff for people. I've done kind of everything under the sun, honestly. You can reach out and just let me know, what your project is, and then we could start talking. But yeah, Symbolic Studios, art and design. Also, snail mail. If you guys ever feel like sending me a letter or anything like that, P.O. Box 930, Carson, Washington, 98610. Also, my girlfriend has a couple of podcasts, and her channel is called Michelle's Healing Home. The first show right there, it's last Thursday. So every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific time, we go live, and it's a really good time. We have a lot of fun. It's very casual. I bring my symbolic awareness of things to the table. She brings her herbal experience to the table, and we kind of we go all over the place though. And it's very much interactive. We're hanging out with the chat, and fielding their questions. And I'll just say some of the people in the chat are brilliant. So I don't know. It's just a really good time. She also has another show called The Healing Home. So that's on Tuesday at 4 p.m. every Tuesday. And she interviews people that she wants to talk to, essentially. So herbalists, homesteaders, alchemists, all sorts of interesting people. So that is Michelle's Healing Home here on YouTube. And there is a link in the description to reach her channel as well. And then for everything else, symbolicstudies.com is where you can reach me. And once again, if you made it this far, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All right, so I have gone for 2.5 hours. Let me see what's going on in the chat. I'll probably hang out for a little bit and see what's going on, and then that'll be that. So here I am. Nice, awesome, guys. Well, that was really fun for me. I think that, yeah, I mean, some of these cards are really, really awesome, and some of these decks too. I want to know, because we're in Aries right now, and then we're going to be in Taurus. So I'm already thinking ahead about some of the cards from some of these other decks and what sort of themes we'll be talking about. But let me check the chat. Oh, what's up, Polymathing? He says Mario's Taurus is amazing. Thanks, man. Yeah, I really like the way Taurus came out, for sure. Taurus and Aries are probably, to be completely honest, those are my personal favorites. I like, Taurus and Gemini are my personal favorites. Aries is cool. I do appreciate it. I do like it. I do think there is room for improvement. I almost think my Taurus and Gemini, though, like I think they're solid as is. So I appreciate that. And nice to see you. What's up, Slick? So Slick is saying Rogan's up. Ye symbolic acolytes. Nice, dude. Yeah, so he's saying hit that like button. Hey there, wizards, wraps, and minerals. Nice to see you. Thanks, man. Slick is just saying, great show, Mario. Slick Dissident on YouTube, an amazing decoder. His symbolic awareness is incredible. And so we come at things from different angles, and I love that. He brings stuff to the table that I have never considered before. And he blows my mind on a regular basis, which is really, really cool. What's up, Gordy? Nice to see you, man. So my girl, Michelle's Healing Home, here she is in the chat. She just plugged my link. And then my Cherie, dude, it's so nice to see you. Your continued support always means a lot, so it's great just to have you in the chat. Oh, nice, cool. So he says, my Cherie says, Longo from Old World, Florida, his bookstore has over 350 decks. No way. Dude, that's so cool. I actually, I just got in touch with Longo today, and he replied, and it was cool, and it sounds like we're gonna touch base at some point. But I've been digging into his work as of late, and admittedly, like kind of late to the party. But I do appreciate his perspective, and I want to talk to him about Northern symbolism so bad, and the North Pole and all of that stuff. And yeah, he's a really, really interesting guy. So I'm on board with Old World Florida for sure. Very interesting stuff. Nice, Hank. What's up, man? He says, you've outdone yourself once again, Mario. Great job. Much appreciated. Also, too, if anyone in the chat, I'm not even encouraging you guys to leave a super chat, but is my super chat enabled? Because I'm going through the whole AdSense sort of process right now. And I just want to know, it's like, can you actually, is that icon like visible, and can people leave super chats? Because I don't know where I'm at with everything. They needed to verify my shit and all that kind of stuff. Hey there, Revenus Beats. Beautiful art. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Hey there. So Jonas Tripp says, can you do the Cagliostro tarot deck sometime? Yeah, if I had it, I would totally, I'm down. For sure. Hey, Benjamin. What's up, dude? Nice to see you, man. Balderson here is a fantastic guy. Love his channel. Love what he's doing. So if you're not familiar with what he's up to, check out Odin's Alchemy, on YouTube. He's a solid homie. I really like him. All right. Right. Cool. So... Alina says, bravo, incredible, thank you. I've got some ideas, but I can't speak English so good. Could I write you an Instagram later? Yeah, feel free. You guys can message me wherever. I honestly, some of the comments I've gotten from people and the insights I've gotten from people on Instagram, elsewhere, it's been awesome. That's been one of the coolest things about actually having a platform, is just getting all of these killer sort of insights and book recommendations and things like that from people. Nice. Hey, Jason. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Oh, what's up, Zachary? How's it going? I just talked to Zachary today, so we're working on a little project together. Nice to see you, dude. He says, definitely a branch in the ass, skirt pulled up. Yeah, right. I know. And well, that was the thing, is that I'm like, that's the card. That's my card. Come on, but hey, that's just the nature of the beast with the Solobuska. Right. So obviously, guys, I can scroll on and on and on here because there are like hundreds and hundreds of comments. But yeah, thank you guys so much. This is awesome. Like I said, I plan on doing this for each sign. So I'll scan all the cards and put together the presentation. Also, two things that I mentioned earlier on. One, if you leave a comment, I'm going to pick somebody by the end of the weekend to get a free tarot reading. And then also, right after this, I'm going to upload a PDF of what I just showed you guys. So if you guys want like a higher resolution of the PDF, that's going to be available here in just a few minutes after I log off. But yeah, let me see if there's any super new comments, and then I will take off. Hey, Sunseed, what's up, Rachel? Nice to see you, as always. Oh yeah, nice. Slick just mentioned. So, our good buddy Chance Garton of the Interverse podcast, awesome channel as well. I love Chance and everything that he's doing. He has a panel of people on once a month to talk about herbs and plants related to the sign. And so it's called Astro Herbalism. That's the series. I'm on there. My girlfriend Michelle's on there. Slick's on there. Chance is on there. And then our good friend Kyle Denton from Tippy Canoe Herbs, who's like a stud with herbalism. We get together and basically, for the most part, Michelle and Kyle, they pick the herbs that relate to Aries, and then me, Slick, and Chance, we're just kind of like riffing off of these herbs and picking their brain and stuff. It's really, really awesome. It's a great time for sure. But yeah, good call, man. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, no worries, dude. He said the super chat works. That's awesome. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all good. It's all good. I literally just wanted to see if it was working because I have not been on the YouTube side of things. I'm just doing everything through StreamYard. Yeah, nice, dude. Polymathing, man. Thank you so much. 444. Dude, like I said earlier, every bit goes a long way. I really, really appreciate it. Um, oh, what? Really? Okay, so I'm assuming this is about me. The Candyman says, "Oh, I seen you before in person. I'm not trying to say where, but Oregon." Well, I mean, I'm intrigued. You should send me a DM somewhere, or maybe you can just post it in the chat here, and I'll check that out. What's that all about? Where did you see me? Maybe I don't know. I could see maybe a few different sort of ways that we have crossed paths. Nice. Cool. Right on, right on. What's up, Birdog? Appreciate it, dude. I was on his show maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, something like that. Right on, dude. The professor. What's up, man? Dude, I always love seeing you around. I love your support and just the various insights I've gotten from you. So much appreciated. You're always just super supportive. It's really, really cool. So anyways, I hope you're having a good night. Right on, guys. All right, I'm going to log off. That'll do it. Until next time, I'll check you later. Have a good weekend.